Well, having given my eulogy of Amelia when I went through her publications, I'm not quite sure what's left for me to say, except that this paper isn't about the sea, contrary to what I said earlier. We're really looking forward to hearing from her, and we're always very grateful for her participation. If you don't remember what I said when I introduced her books, I've got it written down and I can tell you all about her.
Thank you so much, Alana. Thank you for inviting me again to come here and be part of this conference with my research. And I can say that I'm still working on the Seafaring Gods and Saints. That was my DECRA grant, and I'm also working on this particular topic for an article that will be in a project called the Ecclesiae, the Early Christian Communities, which is a Swiss-German project. They have a really nice website, which you can check out, with different cities being populated as people are working on these things around the world. I'm also just beginning an ARC project with Professor Bronwyn Neal, who is away right now at the Center for Apocalyptic and Post-Apocalyptic Studies. Anyway, with Bronwyn, I will be from July working on a project on images of power, Roman mass media, and the imperial cult from the 1st to the 5th century. So that will take me back to Corinth, which will be wonderful. And my work at Corinth started with my PhD thesis in 2004 through 2008, and that I then published as book Corinth in Late Antiquity. And this is taken a little bit from that, but also reaching back in time, because in my thesis and in my book, I really focus on Corinth in Late Antiquity, so 3rd to 6th century. But in order to get back to Paul and to Paul's community, we have to think about the middle of the 1st century through the middle of the 3rd century, and the time when the vast majority of Corinthians were polytheists and probably had no idea that there was both Jews and Christians in their midst. And so in this paper, I want to try and say, well, what did these different communities interact? How did these different communities possibly interact with each other from the 1st to the 3rd century? What can we do with the evidence that we have to try and bring together some examples of coordination of communal interaction or conflict as well? So in thinking about that, you know, this has been referred to lots of times today, but it is worth going back to Paul's programmatic statement, right? That in his community, there will be neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. But we assume that, you know, outside of this community, there are all of these different categories, right, that are applying in Corinth as in other cities of the Roman Empire. But that in the ecclesia, or really ecclesiae, because there's at least two, right? There's a house in Corinth and there's a house in Cenchreae. And then as time goes on, there are most likely other houses too, but there's at least two houses to start with. That in those places, there are, first of all, both Jews and non-Jews, right? So there are people who were accustomed to go, again, not just to the synagogue, but to the synagogues, because there's also at least two synagogues in Corinth. And those are the people, mostly the men, right, who would be going to the synagogue if they were Jews. So then we also have families, entire families, who are coming to these communal gatherings of the ecclesia. And we have people coming, I always think of, you know, Thecla is up in the upper left-hand corner here looking over the wall, but people who are hearing Paul preach, right, who are hearing Paul preach in all sorts of different circumstances and coming because they want to hear more. So whether they are Thecla, you know, or other women, or they are families who are being told about this, they are also coming. And they are also not just Jews or God-fearers, attendees at the synagogue, but they are also Greeks without any sort of connection to Judaism, and they are Romans. Well, they're all Romans, right? Because they're all in the Roman Empire, but only some of them are Roman citizens. Right? of both the Jews and the Greeks and the non-Greeks as well. So I wanted to give the examples as well. At Corinth, you have a lot of family-based polytheistic religion going on, things like the celebration of the Adonis festival, which is in the center, and that is something very much practiced by women in their house and then up on the roof of their house, so that it is public in that way. And then you also have these festivals, which are communal festivals, both public and private, such as represented by the Isis festival. This is the Isis welcoming Io fresco from Pompeii, where we have a lot better evidence. But we can put this together with Pausanias and say, okay, also at Corinth, there would have been a public and a private aspect to the celebration of the Isis festival that went far beyond the family, right? That involved the whole polytheist community of Corinth in the public parts, but then only involved the devotees, the initiates, in the private parts of that festival. Okay, so many of you are familiar with Corinth, but for those of you who aren't as familiar with Corinth, I'm talking about the city on the Isthmus of Hellas, Graecia, which had in the 1st century and long afterwards the status of the capital city of the province of Achaia, which gave its name to this province from being just the northern part of the Peloponnese to being the whole province of Greece, of Hellas, of everything south of Thessaly and Epirus. And that city-state turned provincial capital had been sacked in 146 BC and then refounded in 44 by Julius Caesar as a Roman colony. So it was a colonia Laus Julia Corinthiensis, the colony for the praise of the Julian family at Corinth. And that colony took over the land of the city-state of Corinth. That included the land north of the Isthmus, particularly Paracora and Mount Gerani, and included land south of the Isthmus, everything extending around to the border with Argos and the territory of Argos, which is somewhere around Nemea, the site of the celebration of the Nemean Games, which was very much done by Argos, and Corinth had their rival games, the Isthmian Games for Poseidon. So Corinthians, they celebrate the Isthmian Games for Poseidon on the Isthmus, whereas the Argives to the south, and Argos is just there right on the south, Argos celebrates the Nemean Games for Zeus. And if we zoom in even more tightly, this is a wonderful composite map that James Herbst, architect at Corinth, created for me, which includes, first of all, in black, the city forum, or agora, as it was in the 2nd century, so about 100 years after Paul. And then in gray, you can see the modifications made in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and even 6th century. And those modifications particularly include more small temples along the west side of the forum, and the steady elaboration of the decoration of the natural spring of Pyrene, this spring water fountain on the northeast side. We can see with the triconch, which is the last phase of that fountain house, perhaps even ascribed to the Emperor Julian, according to Betsy Robinson. Right. So for biblical texts, for texts of St. Paul himself of the 1st century, of the middle of the 1st century, we have the 1st letter, the 2nd letter, and Romans, right? And each of these things mentions people, mentions places. As I mentioned before, gives us 2 houses at least, right? And also different groups, lots of good names, and those names include both Greek names and Roman names, and men's names and women's names, right? And we have seen in Larry's masterful presentation the paving slabs laid by a certain Erastus sua pecunia with his own money in exchange for his ideal ship, And if this is not the Erastus of Romans, I think it's very likely that it is at least a family member in the familia sense of this man who laid the pavement by the theater for his ideal ship. He would have had freedmen and slaves, and some of these people were overlapping with each other in being high status civic individuals, right? All right. So when we come to Luke, Acts, we think of maybe a generation or so later in the situation, which agrees in some sense with the letters, but also has some different information about the community and the place of the community, and particularly includes the trial before the proconsul Gallio and the conflict between Paul and the Jews of Corinth, or some Jews of Corinth at least, and the conflict or agreement with Apollos, as well as the 2 visits of Paul to Corinth and time at Corinth. So our proconsul Gallio is a really helpful figure because he is definitely the proconsul, that is the governor of Achaia, the governor of Greece. He's definitely in Corinth, at Corinth, in this span of years from middle of 50 to early in 51. And his brother Seneca says that when he got there, he began to feel feverish, and immediately he took ship and left, claiming it was not a malady of the body, but of the place. Wouldn't it be terrible to be governor of Greece, right? And Pliny also affirms this actually in his natural history, that he needed a long sea voyage to recover from the terrible affliction of being in Corinth. So just awful. We also have a dated decree of the Emperor Claudius, which comes from Delphi, and that gives us also a good fix on the date. And at Corinth itself, we have this torso of the Emperor Claudius, boss of Gallio, from the southeast corner of the Forum, and that is the area where the largest of the 3 basilicas, the civic basilicas of Corinth, was located. So it was the place where he had his offices now, and with the imperial administration had their offices, right? So that, as I mentioned, is the Julian Basilica, which you can see on the east side of the Corinth. That's the biggest basilica there with the star. But there were also basilicas on the south and the north sides. So, there was a good choice of basilicas for the governor, but also for the imperial administration, right, to use. And then in the middle of the Forum, in this row of shops, which we call the central shops, there is a rostra, a Greek bema, that was used from the beginnings of the colony in the 1st century BC all the way through into late antiquity. That is a part of the Forum that the Corinthians respect, and they keep on, adding to it and enhancing it. So that's where the proconsul gives his speeches, holds his tribunal when the weather's nice, where orators also declaim, including Favorinus, whose oration at Corinth we have preserved among the orations of Dio Chrysostom. This is also where merchants and decurions would gather for shopping and for administration. And the decurial hall, the curia, is just south of the tribunal in this horseshoe-shaped chamber as well. Now, this rostra was not a place for public speaking anymore in the Middle Ages, but sometime in late antiquity or early Byzantium, it was rebuilt as a church, a very small church, because, it's only a rostrum. But it was thought to be important by the people of Corinth. And this is one place where we can say, aha, the memory of Paul is with them, right? This is an important place to consecrate as a church. A very small church, but a church. Now, alongside this, we know that in the Byzantine era, there were still also synagogues. So throughout the Christian community of Corinth, from the 1st to the 3rd century, and in late antiquity and in the Middle Ages, there's always at least one other synagogue, a place of Jews who have not converted to Christianity or any other religion in the city. We can tell this not just from the evolving style of the bits and pieces of architectural sculpture and inscriptions, but also from comparing those bits and pieces that we do have to really well-preserved synagogues, such as the Hellenistic building on Delos and the late antique building at Sardis Gymnasium. And we have these amazingly valuable tiny fragments of Hebrew texts that have survived. Hebrew readers tell me that the one on the left says something about the elders have decided something about what they're going to be doing in the synagogue at Corinth. And then we have also the young men preparing for their bar mitzvahs and writing in Hebrew, Moses said, Moses said, Moses said, over and over again on this little bit of stone. Right. But how do we find the Christians before late antiquity in the 1st to the 3rd century of Corinth? This Good Shepherd table support appears to be the earliest Corinthian Christian archaeological find. It's not very big, but it is very important. It was dug up right near the Forum. It's the sort of thing that Christians commissioned or they bought on the market as embodiment for them of Christ the Good Shepherd, not Hermes or someone offering a votive lamb. Is now in the Athens Byzantine Museum. We also then need to look for places of baptism and dining, somewhat similar to the very well-preserved church of the 3rd century at Dura Europos, which still remains our best preserved church, and the house church at ancient Messene, which is also really fantastic and exciting, relatively new find. Okay, so what then would we expect to find in these 2nd to 3rd century house churches, somewhere for baptism, somewhere to eat? What we do have in the excavated houses from Corinth is the most recent excavations at the Panagia Field that I took part in 2004, 2005. This massive Panagia Domus had among many different rooms, very beautifully decorated rooms with frescoes and mosaics, a small cupboard, which you can see right here. And this cupboard here included all of this sculpture, which had apparently sometime in the 4th century been stashed away, perhaps when the inhabitants of the house became Christian. Is the interpretation anyway of Guy Sanders, the excavator. And then the rest of the house could be used by the people of the house for their new domestic cult practice, that is Christianity. And there are water features such as the fountain here and the big fountain here. This is a basin that could be used for baptism, and suggesting that this place was Christianized also is the fact that when it was rebuilt after this earthquake in the 5th century, there was a really nice little late Roman bath put separate to the rebuilt house, which was rebuilt over here. It would be nice if this was used as a baptistry as well, but we still have to do more digging, especially on the east and south sides of this field, which was the site of the Panagia Church from at least the 1500s until the 20th century when it was torn down for the excavations to be done. So at least in early modern times, there was a Panagia, a Church of the Virgin Mary, in this area just east of the Forum. Okay, so I want to also, though, touch on these big cults, right? These big public cults where the vast majority, not just of Corinthians, would be attending these festivals, but there would also be visitors from outside coming from all over, from east and west. So the two major pan-Hellenic cults at Corinth were Poseidon on the Isthmus, right here, the site of the celebration of the Isthmian Games every 2 years, and that continues at least into the middle of the 4th century. The last few names of gifts givers that we have come from Libanius's letters. So certainly there are educated men, pagan men, who are celebrating the Isthmian Games in the later 4th century. And then the other place of Pan-Hellenic importance was the sanctuary of Aphrodite of Acrocorinth, which is up here on the top of Corinth's Acropolis. At the very tip to top, this is how it was depicted on a coin of Corinth. We've seen from Alan's presentation how important local coinage is. This is a coin that was struck at Corinth for the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. So in the 160s to 180. And they depicted, the Corinthians depicted their Acropolis as looking like this, with the temple of Aphrodite on top of it, which is also described by Pausanias and Strabo as well. So down on the Isthmus, this is the sort of sanctuary that would have been encountered. And we know in the 2nd century, according to Pausanias, Herodes Atticus, Herodes the Athenian, and his wife Regilla spent enormous quantities of money erecting inside the temple of Poseidon a new gold and ivory statue group of Poseidon with Amphitrite. This was admired not just by Pausanias, but later on by Philostratus in his Lives of the Philosophers. Next to the big temple, there was also a much, much smaller mystery cult of Palimon, the baby hero of the games, and that was rebuilt at least twice in the 2nd century, and then the whole complex used into, as I said, the 4th century in the era of Libanius, with in the 5th and 6th century, actually the athletes' facilities continuing in use. So even after there was no longer worship of Poseidon and Palimon, there was still athletics of some sort going on. And the bath complex, this wonderful black and white mosaic of a marine thiosos, was utilized by athletes and perhaps even garrison soldiers at the Hexamilion Wall across the isthmus into the 5th, 6th, and maybe even 7th century. All right, but up on Acrocorinth, unfortunately, the statue of Aphrodite is lost. We have several descriptions of it, though, so we can recognize both at Pergae, from the huge fountain facade at Pergae, and in Lycia, in this sarcophagus, we can recognize the armed Aphrodite of Acrocorinth. There's also tiny little versions of her on coins sometimes, so we know that she was holding a shield. Debate continues as to whether or not she was wearing a helmet, but she was certainly holding a shield, and she was posed to her left, and her garment was slipping down to her waist in the way that was echoed as well by the Venus de Milo in the Hellenistic era. So with these cults that are pan-Hellenic, that are pursued by the vast majority of Corinthians, we also have some continuities in the Corinthian communities, whether they be ecclesiae or synagogues or polytheistic cults. That is, the landscape of Corinth, they are all interested in eating, right, in having enough food. And that means that devotion to an idea, a cult, a god that can give you, first of all, your daily bread from grain, and then secondly, your communion wine, or your wine that turns from grape juice into wine properly, which is very important. And then, of course, your olive oil, your basic light source, and also bathing source. Those things are all very important at Corinth all the way through antiquity. And I'm really so amazed that still there is grain, grapes, and olives grown at Corinth today, although they do not yet they do not have to make their daily bread anymore, but some farmers choose to still grow a little bit of grain. On the wine side of things, the growth of Nemean wine has meant that Corinth is kind of riding on their coattails, and everybody's planting vines for Corinthian wine, or currants, which are still very popular, small dried raisins, currants from Corinth. Right. So among the polytheists then in the 2nd and 3rd century, you have a great importance attached to goddesses of grain and the goddesses who are in charge of the underworld, the darkness of the dirt, and the proper harvest, right? The coming up of the grain and its proper seeding and reseeding, right, and maturation. And that includes on the slopes of Acrocorinth, Demeter, Kore, and the Fates. And then in the other areas around the wheat fields and the grain fields, those vineyards of Dionysus. This is the statue of Kore, which was very rudely abused, probably by Alaric and his Goths in the late 4th century, as we are told by a few different sources that Alaric and his Goths also disrupted the mysteries of Eleusis and caused that celebration to end, and that they were at Corinth for about a year from 395 to 396. So once Kore and Demeter were out of the picture, then these things had to still be looked after. And so various cults of Christianity do step in to the picture. It's also probably in late antiquity that Athena loses her status as a goddess of Corinth, who bridled Pegasus, who taught the use of bridles. And this is one from Athens, which was hidden from the Romans, but therefore escaped destruction, along with a number of other bronzes. Now, this is the temple which archaeologists recognized would form the best place to start digging in the 19th century, because it has never disappeared from sight. It's very important to stress this, all right, that this temple, there's only 7 columns left now. There were, I think, 11 in the 19th or 18th century, and several of them were stolen for, various reasons. But anyway, when the archaeologists arrived in the 19th century and said, no more, we're not going to take any more down, they succeeded in keeping these 7 up, which means that they've been there since antiquity, right? Since the 6th century BC. It's really pretty amazing. Now, we know that when the city was refounded in the 1st century BC, the roof was already gone, because the small columns that held up the roof actually were taken by the Romans and reused in other parts of the Forum. So there was no roof in Roman imperial times, but Pausanias says there was a bronze statue of Apollo, and a number of coins illustrate the temple with the inscription Julii. So it is certainly used not just for Apollo, but also for that family, right? The Laus Julia, the Julian family in the Roman imperial times. all the way through, certainly into late antiquity. And we must say that in late antiquity, it's still there and it's still the center of the city, right? The city doesn't move away from it. And part of the reason why the city doesn't move away from it is not just that it is big and it's the center of the city since archaic times, but also because it's poised between two natural features which you cannot move. One is the natural spring of Pyrene, which is water coming out of the ground naturally there and not other places, right? So if you want water, and all human beings do, you've got to stay in and around Pyrene. The other natural feature is the slope, which gives you the theatral space of the theater, which started with just people sitting on the slope, right? And then developed into more and more elaborate building over the centuries, including Erastus's pavement, which is right here in this nice little courtyard, right on the northeast side of the theater, and is a place for passing in and out of the theater building. Right. So Pyrene is still flowing with water. And when they dug it up in the 1890s, there was still water flowing out of all of these arches, which is pretty amazing. I actually needed help from the Red Cross to redirect the piping because so many pipes were going off of it and they weren't really sure where a lot of those pipes were going, but basically they were going to all of the houses in Corinth. And so you can't really, you know, cut off people's water supply just because you need to dig up an ancient fountain. So you can read Betsy Robinson's book to find out how this became the dry archaeological site and all of the natural water of Pyrene was piped off with new pipes to the various places that the old pipes led to. Really amazing stuff. I do want to also mention Sisyphus and Odysseus. They're both important in archaic Corinth and in Roman Corinth. As putative ancestors, Sisyphus being the ancestral king and founder of the Isthmian Games, and Odysseus being his bastard son. Right. Medea also was still remembered in Roman Corinth. Sorry. And her children were still remembered, as well as the terror or fear that they inspired, which was another statue. And finally, I want to conclude with Isis and how Isis was an important goddess at Cancri, as we've heard from Mary Wellborn earlier today. And it was there at Cancri that Paul cut his hair in fulfillment of a vow and sailed away. But he only sailed away as a person, right? He didn't sail away in the community that he had created. And we can see from both literary and archaeological evidence that that community was very important. That community in the 5th century built a large octagon, which you have to imagine right there on the northern headland of Cancri, and that community built a church on the southern pier, which is here. And this is the church that Larry so wonderfully described at the beginning of the day. And this is also the same place where Lucius, in the novel of Apuleius, the Golden Ass, came to the beachside temple of Isis and the communal festival of Isis and was able to eat the roses and turn back into a man. So this is a place that remained a very important festival location for the Christian community as the worshippers of Isis were fewer sometime in the 4th century as well. So that's the last example I want to give you. And finally, that in this great landscape, we have to remember the isthmus over here and Cancri, that churches didn't just replace graves or memories of graves or myths of graves. They also replaced the temples and the religious landscape of Corinth and the Corinthia. From the temples for Aphrodite and Poseidon at the western harbor of Lechion, you get the Lechion Basilica, perhaps for the local saint Leonidas. Here at the Baths of Aphrodite and Asclepius's sanctuary, you get another church for a local martyr, Quadratus. And here we actually know that he really was buried there. We have wonderful inscription for Hosios Quadratus in Greek. So this goes from basically being a tomb to a smaller martyrium to a massive basilica. And then up here on the east side of the city, we have the Cranion Basilica. On Acre Corinth, we have a Temple of Aphrodite. And the last church that we're really still searching for is somewhere near the Panagia field, somewhere near the Forum on this kind of eastern side. But we're pretty sure that that one is dedicated to St. Paul because of this inscription, which was found with these early archaeologists climbing up on the Temple of Apollo, the archaic temple, and digging underneath this building here, which was a 19th century school building of the Greek Revolution. They found, among other things, this inscription: if one of all those dwelling in this land do not prepare for that day, let them have pistis and paulo. And this was set up by Ecclesia tu Hagiu Pavlou, by the Church of St. Paul in the area of the archaic temple and Pyrene fountain. Yeah. Thank you very much. You're welcome. You're welcome.
See, they didn't believe in safety harnesses in those days.
No, they didn't. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that I don't even know how they got up there. I think there's a ladder. I think right here, there's a ladder. But yeah, it's it's a long way up, and it's like 2,500-year-old limestone. Yeah,
Glad it wasn't one of us. Now, some questions. Jim?
Yeah.
Clarifying something you said, in the Panaya field.
Yes.
In the Panaya field,
Yes.
Roman house,
Yeah.
I didn't hear you correctly, so I'm just verifying. Are you saying that the statuary was stashed there or trashed there? Because
So,
both could be
Yes,
true.
So Guy Sanders thinks that it was stashed in the cupboard. And because the cupboard was undecorated, let me go back to that slide, that it was stashed there, maybe not trashed, but put away. Yeah. This little cupboard is where it was found. The cupboard didn't have painted walls or paved floor or anything like that. And so it was certainly not the kind of public part of the house where statuary like that would have been displayed in the 3rd and 4th century, but in the middle to late 4th century, this had all just been stashed away. Yeah, including Roma, who's here, and Asclepius, who's over here. They were apparently the two most important to the owners of the house. And it's not unusual that they should be the last kind of survivors, the most important survivors, because Roma was really important as the Tyche, the Fortuna of the city of Rome, and very much associated with the empire. Yeah. Welcome. Yes. There.
John.
Thanks very much for that presentation. I lived in Corinth for 2 months about 40 years ago.
Oh, wonderful.
So we got reasonably familiar with that.
Yeah.
But my question is, you showed one slide there, which I think was the where the precinct of Parakara is.
Karakora,
Karakora.
yes, yeah.
And
So-
I wondered if you could
Yes.
comment on this current, I understand they've excavated that more recently.
Yes.
And I wonder
the-
if you could comment on that.
Yes, so very fantastic. Just over the last few years, Susan Lupak of this very university has a sinergasia, a partnership with the local minister in Corinth, Yota Kasimi, to do survey and excavation at Parakora, at the sanctuary of Hera Akraya. So she's going to be going back there again with students, I think, in June and July of this year. So these are two sites basically that are associated with Medea and with Medea's children. So this is the fountain house called Glauci, right in the Forum, which is cut into the living bedrock. And it's also in such great shape because it was used also throughout the Middle Ages as a fountain as well. That's called Glauci because it's supposed to be where the princess tried to put out the burning garments and crown that she was wearing because of Medea poisoning her because she was marrying Jason. Anyway, that's on the Corinth side of things. But then this is on the Parakora Peninsula, that northern side past the isthmus. And this is the sanctuary which at the end of Euripides' play Medea declares in her chariot, right, that I'm going to take the bodies of the children to the sanctuary of Hera Akraya in Parakora, and that's where I'm going to bury them. And that's where they're going to be at rest and be separate from you, Jason. And at that sanctuary, not only were there the burial place of the monument of Medea's children, there were also temples of Hera Akraya, Hera of the Point, and of Aphrodite, Limenea, Aphrodite of the harbor, and Humphrey Payne from the British School, before his untimely early death, excavated thousands and thousands of terracotta figurines, dedications of sailors traveling in and out of Corinth, scarabs, and both real Egyptian scarabs and local imitations of Egyptian scarabs, just like, oh, little beetle with, fake hieroglyphics on it. And this was a place of immense importance for the Corinthians heading west and coming back from the west, which is where Susan Lupak of Macquarie is excavating again now. Yeah, very exciting.
Just before we thank Amelia, I just want to mention that the most recent doctor in the room probably just received his doctorate just a very short time ago on the Corinthian community. So congratulations, Dr. Hall. Amelia, thank you for a fascinating presentation, very well illustrated as ever. And I'm now going to invite our president, Dr. Barker, to conclude the conference and to thank all the participants.
It's interesting actually that Larry's talk and Amelia's talk are sort of the bookends, yeah, of our conference, which I don't know if we planned that. Did we plan that? No, it just happened. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, that concludes our conference for this year. And thank you all who have given papers for this conference. It made it a great success, and I'm sure that you would agree that we've learnt a lot from the papers that have been given. So we should thank our paper givers for all the hard work that's gone into that research that we've seen today. And we also ought to thank our volunteers who have made this conference possible. Leslie over there and Jasper over there with a sartorial bow tie. Very impressive. And Elena and Lynn and Karen, who's in Brisbane. I'm here. Yeah, thank you. So we should thank them as well. Now, just a couple of announcements. Next year, we're breaking tradition. And we're having our conference on the 17th of May because Elena's son and my granddaughter have decided that they're having their weddings on around about the same time. So we can't not attend. Otherwise, we'd be in the bad books. And the other thing is that there's plenty of food apparently left over, and if you want to take some, please take some. That'd be great. And lastly, we have these postcards that advertise our society, and you are invited to take some and to hand them out to people that you may think would be interested in our society. So it's got all the details there of how they can join as members. So that concludes our conference. So thank you very much for your attendance.